The rain fell hard that night. Mark sat alone in his small wooden cabin, deep in the forest hills of the outer colony planet. He was drinking hot tea, listening to the sound of water hitting the roof. It was cold outside, the kind of cold that could freeze a person to death. Suddenly, a soft knock echoed from the front door. He froze. No one ever came out this far, especially during a storm. He put down his cup and slowly walked to the door. Another knock, this time weaker. Mark opened the door, and what he saw made him step back in shock. A strange woman stood there, soaked to the bone, shivering like a leaf in the wind. She was not human, that was clear. Her skin was pale blue, her hair wet and silver. Sticking to her cheeks, she looked weak, her arms wrapped around her thin body, her feet bare and muddy. Before Mark could speak, her eyes rolled back and she collapsed onto the wooden floor. He caught her just in time. Mark looked around, but no one else was there, just the dark forest and heavy rain. He dragged her inside, closing the door behind them. His cabin wasn't big, but it was warm and dry. He placed her gently on the couch and grabbed a blanket. She was burning with fever, her breathing shallow. Mark had no idea who she was, but he couldn't leave her to die. He took off her wet cloak and covered her with the blanket, then started a fire in the old stove. He heated water and made some broth, hoping she would wake up soon. Hours passed and finally, she opened her eyes. She sat up quickly, looking around like a scared animal. Mark raised his hands, showing he meant no harm. "You're safe here," he said softly. She didn't answer, just stared at him with wide violet eyes. He pushed the bowl of hot broth toward her. "Eat," he said. Her hands shook as she reached out, grabbing the bowl slowly. She sniffed the food first, then began eating like she hadn't tasted food in days. Mark watched her closely. She looked young, maybe in her 20s, but her body was thin, her clothes torn and dirty. She had strange markings on her neck and arms, glowing faintly in the firelight. He didn't ask questions. Not yet. When she finished eating, she leaned back on the couch and closed her eyes. Still holding the empty bowl, Mark covered her with another blanket and sat down on the chair nearby. He had so many questions. Where had she come from? Why was she alone in the middle of a storm? And what kind of trouble was following her? In the middle of the night, she woke up screaming. Mark jumped from his chair, grabbing a lantern. She was kicking, crying in a strange language he couldn't understand. He gently held her shoulders, trying to calm her down. "It's okay, you're safe. It's just a dream," he whispered. Her eyes opened wide, full of fear. Then for the first time, she spoke a word he understood. "Run," she said. Weakly, her voice dry and broken. Mark blinked, confused. "Run? From what?" he asked, but she had already fainted again. Mark sat beside her the rest of the night, listening to the storm outside. His mind was full of worry and questions. This was no normal traveler. Something terrible had happened to her, and whatever it was, it might not be over yet. In the morning, Mark stepped outside to collect firewood. The sky was still gray, the air cold and heavy. He found strange footprints near his cabin, too large to be hers, and too fresh to be old. He followed them a little into the forest, but they vanished quickly, like someone had covered their trail. When he returned, the woman was awake, sitting up on the couch, her eyes locked on his, full of warning. "They're coming," she said in a whisper, barely louder than the wind. Mark didn't know who she meant, but deep in his chest, he felt something cold and sharp fear. He had just wanted a quiet life, far from war and cities. But this stranger, this starving alien girl, had brought something else into his world. Something dark, something dangerous, and maybe something worth fighting for. The morning was still cold when Mark poured a second cup of tea. Watching the pale blue woman rest on his couch, she didn't sleep like a human, not really. Her body was still, but her eyes moved under closed lids, and sometimes her fingers twitched like she was remembering something painful. Mark had patched the holes in her clothes and gave her dry socks. He didn't know if they were comfortable, but she didn't complain. She hadn't said much since the night she collapsed at his door. Only a few broken words and long stares, but Mark wasn't in a rush. People who come from storms don't talk quickly, they survive first. He made breakfast toast, eggs and heated broth, and left it by her side. She opened her eyes slowly, looking at the food like it was a puzzle. Mark gave her space, walking to the other side of the cabin, pretending to check the power lines, but in truth, he was watching her carefully. She sniffed the eggs, took a bite, then paused, blinking in surprise. It was clear she hadn't eaten real food in a long time, maybe not ever. After eating, she sat with her legs tucked under the blanket, her eyes following Marker. Voice, when she finally spoke, was soft and unsure. "You live alone," she said. Mark nodded. "That's right. It's peaceful out here." She looked out the window at the trees, the fog, the shadows between the trunks. "No one to hear you scream," she whispered. Not as a threat, but like she had once screamed and no one came. Mark didn't answer. Instead, he asked, "Do you have a name?" She hesitated, then looked away. Illyra. The name felt heavy, like it belonged to a story that ended badly. Mark tried saying it softly. "Illyra, I'm Mark." She nodded, then pulled the blanket tighter, her hands shaking again. He thought she might cry, but she didn't. Instead, she stared at the fire like it held the answer to her pain. Later that day, Mark went out to fix the water pipe that had frozen from the storm. When he returned, the door to his cabin was open. He dropped the tools and rushed inside, thinking she had run away, but she was still there, sitting at the table, holding a picture frame with both hands. It was an old photo of Mark with a team of engineers from 10 years ago, all smiles, dust, and broken robots. "You were a builder," she said. "I was," Mark replied. "Before the war." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Which side?" Mark shrugged. "I stopped caring. Too many lies, too many dead." Illyra stared at him a long time, then gently placed the frame back on the shelf. "Smart choice," she whispered. "Caring gets people killed." Mark didn't argue that night. She stood at the window, staring into the forest. He watched her reflection in the glass, still, quiet, but alert. Her ears twitched at distant sounds, and her fingers gripped the curtain like she was waiting for someone to appear from the trees. "Is someone after you?" he asked quietly. Illyra didn't move. "They don't stop once they mark you." Mark stepped closer. "Who are they?" She turned slowly, her face pale in the moonlight. "Collectors." The word didn't mean much to him yet, but it made his skin crawl. Illyra sat down and pulled the blanket over her shoulders again. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "They come when no one's watching. Take the ones no one will miss, test them, use them, and leave behind only pieces." Mark sat across from her, eyes locked on hers. "You escaped," he said. Illyra looked away. "No. Someone helped me." Mark didn't ask who. He had a feeling that story wasn't ready to be told yet. She pointed to the shelf where Mark kept random parts from old machines, tools, wires, batteries, small plasma cores. "That," she said, standing up and walking to it. "That's how they find me." Mark frowned. "The tech?" Illyra nodded, pulling out a small black chip and tossing it into the fire. The flames cracked loudly, then turned blue for a moment before returning to normal. Mark stared at her, surprised. "Was that a tracker?" She nodded. "They're always listening." He suddenly felt exposed, like invisible eyes had been watching the cabin all along. "Then they'll come here," he said. Illyra looked at him with calm sadness. "Yes, they will." Mark didn't ask her to leave, didn't shout or panic. Instead, he picked up his rifle, checked the charge, and leaned it by the door. "If they come," he said quietly, "we won't make it easy for them." Illyra didn't smile, but something softened in her face, something close to trust. For the first time, she reached for his hand, cold and shaking, and held it gently. No more words were spoken that night, but something had changed between them, something silent, strong, and growing in the quiet spaces between fear and hope. The wind outside howled like a warning. Mark couldn't sleep. He lay on the couch while Alira took the bed, but his eyes kept drifting to the shadows. Something didn't feel right, not in the cabin, not in his own chest. At some point during the night, he heard a faint humming sound, like static but softer. He stood up slowly, picked up the lantern, and walked toward the back room where he kept old junk. The sound was coming from inside. When he opened the door, he found Alira standing in front of the shelves, eyes closed, her hand resting on a rusted metal cube. The cube was glowing faintly, pulsing with blue light like it was alive. Mark didn't move, just watched. The cube had been dead for years, salvaged from a broken alien beacon long ago. But now, under her touch, it looked like it remembered something. Alira's lips moved, whispering in a language he didn't know. Suddenly, the cube released a small shock of light and flew backward, hitting the wall with a loud bang. Alira gasped and fell to her knees. Mark rushed to her, grabbing her shoulders. "Are you okay?" She nodded slowly, her breathing fast, her eyes filled with something between fear and wonder. "I saw it," she whispered. "A memory, not mine but old, very old." Mark helped her to her feet and led her to the couch. She looked dazed, like her mind was still somewhere else. "What did you see?" he asked, sitting beside her. "Stars," she said, voice barely above a breath. "Ships in flames, voices crying, someone running, someone hiding something." Mark stared at the cube, still glowing slightly where it lay. "Why did it react to you?" he asked. "I don't know," Alira whispered, "but I think I was meant to find it." The next morning, Mark tested the cube again, but nothing happened. It stayed cold and silent, as if it had gone back to sleep. But Alira watched it closely, like it was a part of her now. Later, Mark went outside to chop wood, trying to clear his head. He needed answers, but they only led to more questions. When he returned, Alira was sitting by the fire, the cube in her hands again. "It's not just tech," she said softly. "It's alive in some way, or connected to something living." Mark sat down slowly. "You said it showed you ships in flames. Were they human?" Alira shook her head. "No, older, from before humans were known in the stars. I think this thing remembers a war long forgotten." Mark frowned. "Then why show you?" Alira looked at him, her eyes serious. "Because I'm not just a runaway, Mark. I think I'm something else, something they were trying to erase." The room fell silent except for the crackle of the fire. Mark stood up and opened his storage chest, pulling out a data reader he hadn't touched in years. He placed the cube next to it and turned the scanner on. The screen flickered, then exploded with alien symbols, numbers, and sounds that made the reader overheat within seconds. Sparks flew, and the screen cracked. Mark pulled the power and stepped back. It overloaded everything. That wasn't just a signal, it was a message. Alira stood beside him, watching the broken screen cool down. "They'll come for it," she said. "And for me." Mark looked out the window at the dark woods. "If they're tracking signals, they probably already know where we are." Alira didn't blink. "Then we leave now before nightfall." Mark packed food, tools, and weapons, while Alira wrapped the cube in layers of cloth and placed it in a steel case. As they stepped outside, the wind had changed. It was too quiet, too still. The forest didn't move, not even the smallest leaf. Mark stopped walking, something pulling at his senses. He turned just in time to see a light in the sky, small, sharp, and falling fast. It wasn't a star, it was a ship, and it was landing nearby. Alira grabbed his arm. "We're out of time." They ran toward the old canyon trail behind the cabin, moving through narrow paths and silent stones. Mark had walked this trail many times, but now it felt different, like the land itself was holding its breath. At the top of the ridge, they stopped to catch air, and Alira looked back one last time. The cabin was just a dot in the distance, and above it, a dark ship hovered low, silent as a ghost. Alira clenched her fists. "They're here," Mark nodded. "Then we'll stay ahead of them." He looked at her, not as a stranger anymore, but as someone tied to something ancient. dangerous and maybe even holy, and he knew without question that his life would never be the same again. The silence was too perfect. It followed them like a shadow as Mark and Alira moved through the forest. Deeper into the wild hills, birds didn't chirp, leaves didn't rustle, and even the wind seemed scared to speak. Mark didn't like it. Alira walked ahead, alert, her body tense like a hunted animal that had learned to survive by listening to what others ignored. Suddenly, she stopped and knelt near a bush, her fingers brushing the ground gently. Mark leaned closer and saw 2 footprints, deep ones, fresh, and too large to be human. "They're scouting," she whispered. "They landed near the cabin." "But they're spreading fast." Mark scanned the tree line. Feeling eyes that couldn't be seen, Alira turned toward him. "We need to move toward higher ground. The signal can't travel through stone. It might buy us time." They climbed through a narrow ravine, squeezing between rock faces, until they reached a cave Mark had once used for storing supplies during long hunts. Inside it was cold and dark, but dry. Alira pulled out the steel case holding the strange cube and set it gently on the ground. It hadn't glowed again since the overload, but Mark could feel it humming softly in the back of his mind. "What do they want with it?" Mark asked, sitting against the cave wall. Alira didn't answer at first, her eyes staring into the dark. Then, slowly she said, "The collectors don't just take people, they take knowledge. They erase things, erase truths, and rewrite history." Mark frowned. "So you think this cube is something they don't want people to remember?" She nodded. "It holds something they fear, maybe proof of who they really are, or what they did before anyone was watching." Mark rubbed his temples. Then, "Why give it to you? Why let you escape with it?" "They didn't," Alira said, her voice sharp now. "Someone inside helped me, someone who broke every rule to get me out, and died for it." Mark didn't ask for names. The pain in her voice told him not to. He watched her unwrap the cube and place it in the center of the cave floor. Then she sat cross-legged in front of it, closing her eyes. "What are you doing?" Mark asked quietly, trying to hear what it remembers. She said, without waking it up again. He stayed silent, watching, the fire from their lantern dancing on the walls like ghosts trying to speak. Minutes passed, then an hour, and just as Mark began to doze off, a sudden sharp breath from Alira pulled him back. Her eyes snapped open, glowing faintly for a moment. "I saw something," she said, standing slowly. "Coordinates, a place, hidden under the mountains north of here." "That's where we need to go." Mark stood as well, gathering their things quickly. "Is it safe?" "No," she replied. "But it's the only place they don't control." They moved at dawn, slipping through the thinning fog, following animal paths and frozen streams. Every few minutes, Mark stopped and listened, but the forest remained unnaturally quiet. At one point, they saw a drone hover far above, then vanish into the clouds. Mark knew the collectors weren't just hunting anymore. They were tracking, searching with machines smarter than anything humans had built. But Alira seemed drawn forward, like something was calling her, pulling her toward the unknown. As they climbed a ridge, Mark noticed something strange. The trees ahead looked burned, as if a fire had passed through only days ago, but no smoke remained, no smell, just blackened wood and silent ground. Alira stopped and whispered, "They were here." Mark looked around. "What were they burning?" "Evidence," she said, her voice hollow. "They always burn the past." At the center of the scorched clearing, they found something unexpected, a symbol carved into a stone slab, half buried in ash. Alira knelt and touched it, her fingers tracing the lines. Mark asked, "What does it mean?" She stood up slowly, her face pale. "It's my family mark." Mark blinked. "Then, this place was yours?" Alira looked around. "Not just mine. It was where my people first arrived, long before the stars had maps, before the collectors took control." Mark stepped closer, feeling the weight of it, the ashes, the silence, the buried truth. "They're not just after you," he said. "They're after everything your people knew." Alira nodded. and for the first time, tears fell down her cheeks. I thought I had nothing left but this. This means something survived. Mark placed a hand on her shoulder. Firm and steady, then we protect it, he said. Whatever it takes. As they left the clearing, neither of them noticed the small blinking eye hidden beneath the ash. It recorded their faces, their voices, and sent a silent signal up to the dark ship in the clouds. High above, something turned and began descending with quiet hunger. The real hunt had begun. She wasn't breathing. For a long second, Mark thought he had lost her. They had just escaped the scorched valley, climbing through thick branches and frozen rocks. When Alira collapsed without warning, Mark dropped to his knees, grabbing her by the shoulders, her body limp and cold. Then suddenly she gasped, her eyes flying open, as if pulled back from the edge of something deep. He held her close, not asking anything yet, just waiting for her to blink and see him. Finally her voice returned, soft and shaking. I saw the inside of it, the place. The truth, it's not just a ruin. Mark helped her sit up, watching her skin glow faintly in the dim forest light. What is it then? He asked. It's a gate, she said slowly. A place meant to hide something, or protect it. Mark glanced at the steel case in his backpack where the cube still rested. You think it's connected to the gate? I know it is, she said, and so do they. They camped under the twisted roots of an old giant tree, its hollow trunk large enough to shield them from the night cold. Alira sat near the fire Mark had built, silent, staring at her hands. He passed her a warm drink, but she didn't take it. Her voice came low, nearly lost in the crackle of flame. Do you want to know why they chased me? Mark didn't speak, just nodded once. I was a technician, she said. Born on a floating station, far from planets, far from war. She picked up a small stick and drew in the dirt. Circles and lines Mark couldn't understand. I fixed machines, opened things others left broken. But one day, I touched something I shouldn't have. Her eyes rose slowly to meet his. I unlocked a memory left inside a piece of old tech, just like the cube, and it changed everything. Mark leaned in, listening as the fire danced between them. The collectors found out, she continued. They erased everyone I worked with. Every file, every trace of that place. Her voice cracked slightly. But she went on. They chained me, experimented on me. They thought I was just a tool, but something woke up inside me. Mark stared, the puzzle pieces finally falling into place. You're not just carrying the cube, he said quietly. You're part of it, Alira nodded. Whatever they locked inside, it responded to me, and now it won't let go. Mark rubbed the back of his neck, thinking, then if the gate unlocks with you, it's not just memory, it's power. Or knowledge. Or both, she whispered. They heard movement far off in the woods, like metal scraping bark. Mark quickly put out the fire and grabbed his rifle. Alira clutched the case tightly. The glow from inside now faint but steady. They moved in the dark, silent, using hand signs and quick glances to guide each other. At one point, a beam of light scanned the forest behind them, slicing through trees like a blade. They dropped flat to the ground, not moving until the beam passed. When they reached the cliffs overlooking the frozen lake, they finally saw it, a dark pyramid half buried beneath ice and rock. Alira stopped walking, her breath caught in her throat. That's it, she said, her voice trembling. The gate. Mark stared at it, ancient and massive, older than any building he'd ever seen. Symbols glowed along the edges, pulsing gently like a heartbeat waiting to be answered. As they moved closer, Alira held the cube in both hands, her steps slower, more careful. Mark noticed her body starting to shine faintly, her skin reacting to the structure like metal to a magnet. The gate responded, stone shifting and sliding as she approached, revealing a narrow passage filled with light and mist. She turned to him and said one thing, something so quiet it almost got lost in the wind. If I don't come out, burn the cube. Mark shook his head instantly. No, we go in together. Alira looked at him, truly looked, and for the first time since she fell at his door, she smiled, "Then don't let go," she said, and stepped into the light. Mark followed, hand on his weapon, eyes open, not knowing what waited inside but knowing whatever it was, he would face it with her. Behind them, far above in the sky, 3 black ships hovered like vultures, silent and watching. The collectors had found the gate too. And they were coming fast, asterisk. The walls were breathing. Not with air, but with light, pulsing gently through ancient veins of crystal and stone. Mark followed closely behind Alira, his steps echoing softly in the glowing passage. The deeper they went, the less real the outside world felt. There was no sound of wind, no cold, no heat, only silence, heavy and strange. Alira moved like she had been here before, though she hadn't. Her eyes reflected the blue shimmer on the walls, her body responding to something in the gate that Mark couldn't see or hear. He felt it too, pressure building in his chest. Tightness in the air, like something was waking up. Finally, they reached a chamber so large it felt endless, its ceiling lost in mist, its floor smooth as glass. In the center stood a single pedestal, floating just above the ground. Alira stepped forward and placed the cube on it, her hands trembling slightly the moment it touched the surface. The entire room lit up with flowing patterns of light, forming lines, symbols, and images in the air. Mark stepped back, shielding his eyes as strange languages flashed past him. Memories not his own flooding the space around them. He saw stars being born, ships vanishing into black holes, civilizations building and falling all in seconds. Alira stood still, her eyes glowing brightly, her voice rising in a language Mark had never heard but somehow understood. Then everything stopped. The room went dark again, except for the cube, now pulsing red. Alira collapsed to her knees, breathing hard, her skin pale and damp. Mark rushed to her, grabbing her shoulders. "What happened? What did you see?" She looked at him slowly, eyes wide with shock. "I saw everything," she whispered. "They used to protect the galaxy long ago, but something changed them. They became hunters, thieves, erasers." Mark helped her to her feet, his voice low. "The collectors?" She nodded. "They were the Watchers once, guardians of knowledge, until they discovered how to steal life from memory." Mark swallowed hard. "And the gate?" Alira turned to the cube. "It's a key, but not just to open this place. It's to unlock what they've stolen and hidden." She touched the cube again, and the red glow turned gold. A path opened on the far wall, revealing stairs made of light that led deeper underground. Mark hesitated, then stepped beside her. "Let's finish this." But as they took the first steps, a distant explosion shook the chamber. Dust fell from the ceiling, and the ground trembled. Mark spun around, weapon raised. "They found us," he said grimly. Alira didn't panic. Instead, she closed her eyes and held the cube against her chest. "I can close the gate behind us for now, but only if you go first," she said. Mark shook his head. "I'm not leaving you behind." Before she could reply, the wall near the entrance burst open, and black-cloaked figures stormed in silent. Tall, faceless, moving like shadows with weapons drawn. Mark fired first, the blast lighting the chamber, striking one of the figures square in the chest. But it didn't fall. It absorbed the energy like water, and kept coming. "Run!" Alira shouted, pushing Mark toward the light stairs. He grabbed her arm, pulling her along with him, both sprinting into the narrow glowing path as energy blasts tore through the chamber behind them. The path shifted with each step, the walls rearranging, trying to protect them. Alira focused on the cube, whispering to it, guiding it, and with each word she spoke, the path sealed behind them, one section at a time. Mark felt the heat of a blast brush his shoulder, tearing part of his jacket, but he didn't stop. They reached the final platform, another chamber, smaller, older, filled with floating crystals and a single giant orb of light. The cube floated from Alira's hands and hovered above the orb, then slowly sank into it. A shockwave burst outward, knocking them both to the floor. Mark coughed and looked up. Everything had gone still again. The orb pulsed slowly, peaceful now. Alira lay beside him, chest rising and falling fast, her face pale but calm. "It's done," she said softly. "The truth is unlocked. Everywhere, across every data wave. They can't hide anymore." Mark looked at her in awe. "You just lit a fire across the stars. But far above, beyond the gate, beyond the planet, the Collector's main vessel received the signal. Their secrets had been exposed. Their masks would fall, and they were already preparing to strike back harder than ever before." The stars were screaming. Mark didn't hear them with his ears, but he felt it deep in his bones, a strange vibration from the sky itself. He stood outside the ancient gate as the wind rushed past him, stronger than before, wild like a storm made of secrets. Alira sat beside him, silent, her eyes locked on the clouds above, where black ships now moved like hunters circling prey. "They're not hiding anymore," she said softly. "They're angry." Mark checked his rifle again, knowing it wouldn't do much against warships, but still gripping it like it mattered. "What do they want now?" he asked, already knowing the answer. "To erase what I just set free," she said, her voice steady, "and to make sure no one ever remembers who they truly were." The cube was gone now, melted into the heart of the ancient orb, its energy sent through hidden channels across space. Every terminal, every archive, every network in the galaxy had received the pulse. The lies were falling apart, the truth exposed. But the Collectors hadn't come to argue, they had come to destroy. The first blast hit the mountain an hour later, shaking the ground beneath Mark's feet. Rocks tumbled from cliffs, trees burst into flames, and the sky turned a sharp, burning red. Mark helped Alira up, her legs weak but her eyes still strong. "We can't run this time," she said. "But we don't have to lose either." He looked at her, confused. "What do you mean?" Alira pointed to the ancient ruins behind them, the parts of the gate that hadn't yet activated. "This place wasn't just a vault," she said. "It was a weapon too, a last defense built by those who came before us." Mark raised his eyebrows. "You know how to use it?" "Not alone," she said, reaching out her hand. "But maybe with you." He took her hand without hesitation, and the moment their palms touched, the ground beneath them pulsed with blue light. The stones glowed, the air thickened, and the walls of the ancient gate began to rise again higher than before, forming a massive shield of light above the valley. The enemy ships closed in fast, their weapons charging, dark energy pulsing at their tips. But just before they fired, the gate exploded with force, sending a wave of light upward, a dome of pure memory and truth. It struck the first ship, not with heat, but with knowledge, projecting every stolen secret, every erased name, every forgotten voice into the minds of those aboard. The ship shuddered, then stopped moving, drifting silently like it had forgotten how to fight. One by one, the others followed, caught in the light, their systems freezing as raw history poured into them like wildfire. Mark and Alira stood together at the heart of the light, holding each other as the storm of truth washed over the world. And when it was over, the sky was quiet again. No ships, no weapons, just stars, blinking softly like they had been watching. The whole time, Alira leaned her head on Mark's shoulder, her voice barely a whisper. "It's done," Mark smiled, tired but full of something new, hope. "You changed everything," he said. She looked up at him, eyes shining with gentle fire. "We changed everything." They didn't return to the cabin. It was gone now, burned in the first wave of attack. But they found others in the days that followed, people who had seen the truth, who had questions, who wanted to remember. Together, Mark and Alira traveled from world to world, not hiding anymore, but teaching. The galaxy had once been silent, ruled by fear. Now it buzzed with voices, old and new, and somewhere in that vast sky, the stars no longer screamed, they sang.